journalist to be able to plug into the wall.
Good morning, councillors, members of the public, officers. We'll get started with the meeting and we'll get things underway. I'm going to open the meeting with the karakia. Whakatakata hou ki te uru, whakatakata hou ki te tonga. Kia makinakina, kia uta, kia mataratara ki tai. E hi ake ana te atakura. He tio, he huka, he hauhu. Tihei mauri ora. Councillors, good morning, and I want to note that the meeting will be live webcast this morning. And when we vote, we'll be voting by division, so please raise your hands and say A or no when your name is called. I don't have any apologies, councillors. No one's wishing to submit an apology for early departure? No. Nor do I have any announcements to make today. There aren't any conflict of interest declarations that I've received.
Early departure, just depending on how long the meeting goes for.
Okay. Councillor Free will seek to get this expedited relatively quickly.
Councillor Marshall's an apology.
Not formally noted. Not to me as chair nor to Democratic Services. So.
Oh, I thought he had. He's
okay. In which case, Democratic Services has been noted an apology. I'll move that the apology be noted. All those second, Councillor Kelby Freeman. All those in favour, please say aye. Against. I declare the apologies carried. I'd also like to move the motion that we receive the minutes from the 26th of April 2018, having been circulated as an accurate record of that meeting. Councillor Gilbert, happy to second. All those in favour, please say aye. I declare that recommendation carried. There are no requests for public participation today, so we'll move into general business. Could I ask Deputy Mayor Day to introduce Report 2.1 on the representation review?
Thank you. Morena. Councillors, this item has been to Council in March, and we signed off on the initial proposal to go out to consultation on what our representation arrangements would be, or should be, for the 2019 election. Under the Electoral Act, the Local Electoral Act, Council has to review its arrangements for election every 6 years. Prior to getting to the initial proposal, officers invited preliminary feedback via an online survey from the public on issues relating to the representation review. This feedback was factored into our proposal. Council at its meeting on the 28th of March 2018 resolved to adopt an initial proposal of a modified status quo option. And what went out at that stage was that it was 14 councillors elected from 5 wards plus the mayor elected at large. And the ward boundaries would be adjusted to better reflect the communities of interest, specifically under the Brooklyn suburb, into one ward. So Brooklyn became part of the same ward. And fairer representation, specifically moving the Southgate suburb from Southern Ward into Eastern Ward, so that was looking at numbers. 2 wards, however, were marginally non-compliant with the plus or minus 10% rule, so that was the Southern Ward had too many people and the Eastern Ward had not enough. Current ward names were retained with the addition of Te Reo Māori naming. Now the community has had the opportunity to let us know what they think about the proposal. We received 52 submissions in total. Of the submissions received, 19 were in favour of the Council's initial proposal and 33 were opposed to it. Many of the submissions, 24, were against the inclusion of Southgate suburb into the Eastern Ward, so coming from Southern Ward. So Council is now required to consider the submissions it has received and resolve to either confirm or amend its initial proposal and give public notice of the final proposal on the 13th of June 2018. The people of Southgate have been clear that they identify strongly with being in the Southern Ward. There's also been strong support for bilingual namings of the wards. So Council has taken into consideration the submissions received and reflecting the city's communities of interest. We recommend that the initial proposal be amended by retaining Southgate suburb in the Southern Ward. The key decisions we are making today is that Council has 14 councillors from 5 wards. The Mayor is elected at large. We're uniting Brooklyn as a suburb into the Southern Ward. Retain the 2 community boards with 12 members, retaining Southgate in the Southern Ward. And 5 wards also have te reo names. These are Motu Kairangi for the Eastern Ward, Pai Kawakawa for Southern Ward, Pukehino for Lambton Ward, Takapu for Northern Ward, and Whārangi for Onslow Western Ward. So I move the recommendations, and do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Fitzsimons.
Moved by Deputy Mayor Day. Councillor Fitzsimons. Secondly, we wish to speak.
Just briefly, particularly on the matter of the inclusion of Southgate into the Southern Ward, I think it's really clear from the submissions that the people of Southgate do identify with Island Bay. They identify as being part of the Southern Ward, and they're actually quite strong in their feeling about it. So I think we should listen to them.
Thanks, Councillor Fitzsimons. Anyone else wish to speak? Councillor Dawson.
Thanks, thank you, Mayor Justin. Colleagues, I did flick around, and you've got hopefully some wording for that proposed amendment to this. I do want to acknowledge I do have an interest in this. Obviously, I will no longer live within my ward when we make this change. It is not a pecuniary interest, because quite frankly, the number of our colleagues who don't live in their wards is fairly obvious. But it is an interest, and I acknowledge that. I do want to say that communities of interest means something other than just living within a boundary on a map. It has been clear in the conversations we've had that the boundary lines that are proposed have been based on the boundary lines of our suburb map. No one has gone and knocked on doors and asked them where they think they live. We've simply gone by the lines that exist on our suburb boundary maps, which haven't been reviewed for 15 years, and which in some cases are quite strange. And my own example is one of those. So I live in Mortimer Terrace. When I rented the house in Mortimer Terrace, it was advertised as RO Valley. All of my neighbours believe they live in RO Valley. Directly behind me is the top of Ipuni Street, which is very clearly in RO Valley, but Wellington City Council boundaries put it in Brooklyn. It happens to be the 3rd house in Brooklyn, according to the line, which runs right through the middle of one of my neighbours' properties. And so if they stand on one set, they can live in Brooklyn. If they stand on the other, they can live in RO. It just so happens also that there are houses further north than that line that currently are based in RO Valley because of the way our line does this crazy dog leg around trying to include Tenera Park. So this isn't about communities of interest. It's just, and by the way, there is a very natural geographic line that we could have used for Brooklyn. I'm not sure why we didn't. But communities of interest are not about lines on a map. So my proposed amendment is quite simply that we say what we really mean rather than what we think the Act says we should mean. So I'm proposing that we amend recommendation, I think it was 3.5 or ... point V, to read, the reason for the ward boundary and community board boundary adjustments is to unite the suburb of Brooklyn into one ward and to recognise the fact that Lambton Ward is growing significantly faster than the Southern Ward. That removes what I believe to be the erroneous statement that we have based this on communities of interest rather than simply on suburb lines on the map. So I move that as an amendment. I don't know if anyone will second it.
Councillor Calvert, happy to second. Wish to speak? Anyone wish to speak to the amendment? No, we'll take the amendment. All those in favour, please raise your hands.
Sorry, the thingy isn't working. Give me a moment.
Could I also amend that we update our technology again?
I think it was fairly simple, councillors. Were you listening? I hope so. All those in favour, please raise your hands. Okay.
Sorry,
hang on. I'll call your names. Mayor Lester, Councillor Gilbert, Councillor Kelly Freeman, Councillor Free, Councillor Wolfe, Councillor Panic, Councillor Foster, Councillor Dawson, Councillor Sparrow, Councillor Lee, Councillor Calvert. All those against? Deputy Mayor Day, Councillor Fitzsimons and Councillor Young. The amendment is carried. I'll revert to the substantive. Anyone wish to speak to the substantive? Councillor Foster.
Yeah, look, thanks, Justin. I had a bit of a play around, as you some of you will have read with numbers, got the numbers around the wrong way. Thank you, Peter, for pointing that out. In the first instance, I transposed Onslow Western and and Northern. And I thought, hang on, that doesn't look right, and it wasn't. But transposing the other way, it does work really, really well with 16 councillors. I guess my issue with what we've got in front of us is we started off with something. One of the core parts of the legislation is that a vote anywhere in the city means virtually the same as a vote anywhere else, and that's why you've got this plus or minus 10% in the legislation. And we were just about within the plus or minus 10%. We had a plus 10 and a bit, and a minus 11 and a bit. So we were barely compliant. Apparently the local government commission said, look, we can live with that. However, and I take the point that Fleur made earlier that that the people of Southgate, those who've spoken, have said we'd rather be in the southern ward than the eastern ward. Problem is that then we have a spread which is actually 28%. That's a long, long way apart. So what that means effectively is that a vote in the eastern ward is worth 28% more in terms of the people that it elects than a vote in the southern ward. That's a big difference. That's a very big difference, and I think that's a problem. So I guess what the recommendations say is that what we will do is we will just send that off effectively as an appeal, because it counts as an appeal to the local government commission. And guess what? Who makes the decision? Not us, which is quite convenient. The local government commission makes the decision. So I had to play around with that because I think that, to me, that offends against some fundamental democratic principles, which is each vote is worth roughly the same. So to play around with 15 and 16 councillors to see if that works, and I was one of the councillors, along with Ian Hutchings, who always used to appeal against council when it had 21 or 19 councillors, and say, hey, it's too many, we don't need that many. We always said 14 to 16 was about the right number. And 16 actually works with one boundary change only. One boundary change only, and that boundary change will be to put Broadmeadows with the northern suburbs. So I sent that round to you earlier today. That would work, it would work really well, and the other good bit about it is it would also future-proof the two growth areas, which are Lambton and Northern. So they would still be compliant, and in fact even Eastern, which is the one which is least compliant, would still be compliant if there was a single person extra in Eastern until the city reached a population of 230,000. Well, that's not very likely, so you future-proof it for quite a long time if you do that change. So I think we should have thought a little bit more laterally. I accept that this is far too late, probably in the process for most people, but I'm going to put it there so at least people have said, hey, we had a little bit of a think about that. But the other bit that I think is really important, and I have sent Crispin a little amendment both to say, well, let's do that, but the other part is that we should actually think about the council reviewing in 3 years' time. Whatever the local government commission does with this, it's going to be non-compliant. It's either going to be massively non-compliant or significantly non-compliant, or sorry, it's going to be a little bit non-compliant with a plus or minus 10, or massively non-compliant. We should have another think about it, because in 3 years' time, A, we'll have the census numbers, and B, we will have further growth, particularly in Lambton and probably also in Northern, which will make the non-compliance even worse. So I don't think that we can tenably say that we'll have 6 years of that sort of distorted approach. So even if you don't like the first bit, go for the second bit, say, hey, let's have another look at it in 3 years' time, and let's do it a bit better than we did with this time. Because this time we didn't, sometimes in the past we've subcommitteeised it, so we've had a group of people looking at it in some detail. Unfortunately also this time, because we're doing the LTP at the same time, we haven't sent it through the committee of the whole, so it hasn't had that scrutiny. So it's really been a real once over lightly in those terms. We started off as a once over lightly, we've ended up on a once over lightly, and I think we could do better than that. So at least, even if you don't like doing something what will feel a little bit on the hoof, even if the numbers don't work for you, have a little bit of a think about saying, actually, maybe let's have another think about it in 3 years' time. And I will signal that I'm going to vote against the substantive if it remains as it is, because for me it's just too far apart. And if I don't get a seconder, that's fine.
Councillor Foster, do you have a seconder? Councillor Free, you wish to speak? Councillor Calvert, you wish to speak?
Thank you. I have some sympathy for Councillor Foster's comments, but being delivered at the 11th hour, sort of an hour or two before council meeting, it's very difficult for us to consider it appropriately. And so I can't support any changes today are based on the information, because we have to ensure that appropriate analysis is done. I think the other thing is that we can't forget about the people that it's going to impact, or any further change. and we need to go through a good engagement and consultation process. So I think Councillor Foster makes a very good recommendation that we should be looking at this again in the near future, not the normal standard 6 years. Things are changing very quickly, as well as our own council looking at where we're going to help put more of our growth in various suburbs. So we need to have that understanding as part of the big picture. I think 3 years might be a little bit too late. I think it might be better in a 2-year period, because that would mean that it wouldn't necessarily conflict with long-term plan deliberations. I think one of the things that we've got to think about our communities, we go out to them with lots of different consultations to the same people, and they're all, everybody's busy, and I think sometimes things get missed. So I think we should be looking at in 2 years' time. As Councillor Foster says, we will have the census figures, so we will have much better information that we can rely on and see where the trends are going. Thank you.
Councillor Kelvin Freeman.
Your Worship, I'd like to thank Councillor Foster for his paper, but not for bringing it up early in the morning before 8 o'clock on council meeting. I can barely raise a smile before 8 a.m, let alone look at something as worthwhile as this. I do strongly believe that we should, as you suggest, re-litigate this matter in 3 years. I think there's some merit in the changes you've suggested. However, we have to be cautious, because while we have to take into account communities of interest, the percentage numbers in each ward, would also be uneasy at wards of such patently different sizes as well, a 2-councillor ward, for example, and a 4-councillor ward. So let's have that discussion in 2 or 3 years, and let's, as Councillor Calvert said, go out to consultation again at that stage if we feel there is merit to it. So I won't be supporting a change now, and we'll be voting for the substantive motion. Thank you.
I'll ask Dominic to work on that. Is that reflect, because it doesn't make any sense, Councillor Foster, is that what you've sent through?
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. I mean, basically,
Let's seek officer advice in terms of statutory requirements on a 5-yearly basis? At least every 6. Councillor Gilbert.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. No, I admire the fact that Councillor Foster has tried to develop some thinking about what might happen in the future, but it is far too late. I do think I'm also opposed to actually doing it in 3 years' time. The population growth of Wellington in 3 years will probably be about 10,000 people. Most of that growth will be in the Pukahino and Takapu wards, which are well and truly compliant at the moment. The others will be distributed amongst the other wards and won't make a lot of difference. So I actually just don't think the growth in the 3-year period is great enough, and I think we should stick with the 6 years.
Deputy Mayor Day.
So I'd like to thank the councillors for their comments, and I support the comments of Councillor Calvert at this late time. It's not very helpful. We actually had a number of workshops on this a while ago, and to start with, we were actually given 5 different options. That was the time that we should have been discussing the number of councillors. It's actually incredibly hard to have it thrown in at the last minute and try and make sense of it. So I think it's really important that when we're at that workshop phase, we have these conversations, because that's the right time to do it. And I agree with Councillor Gilbert that I don't actually see that the population growth necessarily will affect the numbers in the way that people think. There are still difficult conversations to have around that. So yeah, I think we should leave it as it is for this one, because we've consulted the community on this. If we change it now, we make it look like we don't actually listen to what they say, because we have had very clear feedback. Thank you.
Councillor Dawson.
Thank you. I'm just going to support the concept of reviewing earlier rather than later. The bottom line is we actually don't know what numbers we're talking about now, because we haven't seen the census figures. I believe that actually those numbers will have changed significantly already, and within a couple of years' time they will change again. And let's face it, we've spent the last year and a half being told how quickly Wellington is going to grow. So it doesn't hurt to look at it sooner rather than later.
The movement's been... Councillor Sparrow, wish to speak?
Yeah, just very briefly, I'm not sure that we have done enough to address the discrepancies, and so I'm of a mind to probably support this amendment.
I think we'll move the amendment. I won't speak. We'll move the amendment that's been moved in and seconded. All those in favour, I'll rather reply. So I will speak. I will speak for the right of reply. Look, again, Councillor Foster, look, I support you giving this some thinking, but again, very last minute, and I'm not sure any situation is ever going to be resolved by adding 2 councillors into the mix, with considerable costs. Also, not only to the I think that the saying goes, every person you add to a board or to a committee meeting, you add an extra hour or so of debate. I'm not sure that's what the city needs. I'm also not sure that we need a minimum of at least probably $300,000 in costs that this would assume from this, and at this late stage. I'm not going. I'll support Councillor Gilbert. Actually, I'm not going to support an additional review. Look, I don't mind. It's, if we have a review earlier, look, whatever. But again, more work, more costs. Do it once, do it properly. We've had a process and we've gone through it. Sure, it's not perfect. Sure, the numbers will change. But the statutory requirements within 6 years, if there's a good reason for a change, but why cast upon our staff more work to do because of what might happen in the future? Let's keep to a good, proper process. I mean, we could review it every year if we wanted to, but I'm just not sure that's a good example of best process. It's on that basis, whatever happens, happens, but I won't be supporting an earlier change. Councillor Foster, right of reply.
Look, thank you, and I accept absolutely the points that people have made about 11th hour. The one point I would make is that effectively the paper came at us with a change, which was pretty much 10th hour, because we didn't have any sort of heads up that, hey, we were going to go from something that was, barely compliant or wasn't quite compliant to something which was massively non-compliant. That's 10th hour. So, yep, apologies for 11th hour, but we also managed 10th hour as an organisation. And the point's also made, I think, Diane, you made the point about, not doing it in LTP yet, and unfortunately, because it's 3, we do it the way we do it, and I had this conversation with Anusha last night, that we always put it in LTP year. Not only the public busy, so are we. And so we're busy focused on a whole lot of stuff, and so if we actually did a review, I would suggest that we try and do it a little bit earlier so we don't tangle it up with the LTP for anybody's sake. And Anusha's nodding on that score as well. That would be helpful. I agree with you, Chris, about the wards of different sizes. That is an issue. Obviously, the easy way of fixing what we've currently got in front of us would have put Southern and Eastern together, but that will have a really disproportionate... Well, it means Southern and Eastern will be challenging from the point of view of electoral processes, but also it will be massively powerful. And I think you'd find that it would disproportionately weight decision-making, which would probably be unfortunate. I agree with the points you made about the urban growth plan. And when we start thinking about, over the next 3 years, we will have a much clearer view of where growth is going to occur, how fast it's likely to occur. We'll also have the census numbers as well. So I think that does say that we look at it in 3 years. So effectively, I agree with the comments that people have made about, this is too late for people to make a change. Having said that, I think the point that I think, Justin, you said, well, it's fine now, we don't have to worry about the future. Well, actually, it's not fine now. The problem is we're going out with something which we know is completely non-compliant. We know that the Local Government Commission's got to have a go at it. And I think we need to try and fix that. And we'd never do it every year. What's the point of doing it every year? You only have an election every 3 years. So why would you do it? Why would you do it this year and then next year and then the following year? It's only the one.
Point of order, Councillor Foster. I will raise a point of misrepresentation. I haven't said it's fine now. I've said we've had a process, and you've had an extensive process of which we've engaged staff hours and consultants, and we've gone through that process. And at the last minute, we've come up with a change. So it's not around that. It's around good process.
Fine, I'm sure you will rule in your favour. So.
Most likely.
And look, the other point I would make, and again, Mr Mayor, I'll challenge you on this one, is you said it would cost at least $300,000 extra. Look, there would be overhead costs for having extra councils. There would not be salary costs. So you don't know how it gets worked out. There's a pool, and the pool doesn't change. So what it would mean is there'd be more of us, and it would share a bit more widely. So there's actually a disadvantage for councillors in having more councillors. Although, having said that, when we were going to go down, do you know what councillors did? Is they fiercely refused to go down even though they'd be paid more because they were worried about not getting elected, I would imagine. So there's a bit of a double-edged sword there. So look, at least if we can say, well, let's have a look at it in 3 years, because what we're going out with is broken. It's not right. And the Local Government Commission will have a go at it, but I think we do need to have a little bit more of a think about it and do it better. And try and do it outside of the LTP process would be helpful too.
Councillor Foster, you wish to take them separately? In favour of Amendment 1, Part A of the amendment. All those in favour, please raise your hands. This is 16 councillors. Part A, so moving to 16 councillors and mayors to 17, with the additional overhead cost of approximately 300,000. Yep. Ruled in favour. Councillor Foster, well done. Councillor Free, Councillor Foster, 4. All those against, please raise your hands. Myself, Councillor Gilbert, Deputy Mayor Day, Councillor Freeman, Fitzsimons, Wolfe, Pannett, Dawson, Young, Sparrow, Lee and Calvert. It fails. The second component of the amendment, all those in favour, please raise your hands. B, well, hang on, it's been called C there now. Sorry? No, sorry, Dominic, so all of...
So those two are A and B.
A and B together.
So we'll do C now.
I think we deal with that as A little 1, A little 2, as opposed to... And so we'll call this B. Everyone knows what we're voting on? We're voting on agree that Council consider review and representation arrangements for the 2022 election. All those in favour, please raise your hands. Councillor Kelly Freeman, Free, Wolfe, Foster, Dawson, Sparrow, Lee, Calvert, and against myself, Gilbert, Deputy Mayor Day, Fitzsimons, Pannett, Young, and it's carried. We'll revert to the substantive. Anyone wish to speak on the substantive? No. We'll take a vote on the substantive. All those in favour of the substantive, please raise your hand. All those in favour of the substantive, please raise your hand. Myself, Councillors Gilbert, Deputy Mayor Day, Kelly Freeman, Fitzsimons, Free, Wolfe, Pannett, Young, Sparrow, Lee and Calvert, and against Councillors Foster and Dawson. That's carried.
Less time consuming. Look, this is very much a procedural process. There's two plan changes in front of us, but I do need to explain, probably for those, I don't think we've had a plan change in the time of this council, so just to explain, these have been through a hearings process. In the case of Plan Change 81, it went through the Environment Court as well. You have two choices. You can either accept it or you can reject it. If you reject it, it goes back to square one and potentially you end up with another hearings process, and you can all sit here and all have the hearings process, and that would be a lot of fun. You cannot amend it. So this is essentially, it's a bit like, because it's a quasi-judicial process, and other than, well, I'm now the only one because Mark Peck was party to Plan Change 81, nobody else has heard the evidence, and therefore essentially you can't judge that evidence. So you can either accept or reject, can't amend. So for Plan Change 81, there were two parts of that plan change. The university came to us with a private plan change, and it said, first of all, it wanted to delist the Gordon Wilson building, and secondly, it said that they wanted to change the zoning from inner residential to institutional precinct. And there are a set of rules there that you see in the papers that we applied to that. It got appealed to the Environment Court, and the bit that was appealed was the part about the delisting of the building. The Environment Court split decision, I must say. The judge said they agreed with us as a hearings committee. The two commissioners did not agree. What they interestingly did is they said that the building is worthy of heritage status, therefore it should stay listed. They stopped short of doing anything about saying whether they believed it was economically viable to do anything with it. And that's interesting if you read the decision. So anyway, so the delisting bit falls away. The Environment Court says no, that's not happening, but it does leave the institutional precinct bit still live. And so what we're being asked to do essentially is to put our rubber stamp on the institutional precinct part of it. Plan Change 82 is a set of what we tend to do a set of what we call rats and mice colloquially every year or so, and they're usually non-contentious. Sometimes they're mistakes, sometimes something's changed, and we want to reflect that change. They've been through a hearings process in front of an independent commissioner. There was an independent commissioner chosen because we were a landowner in one case, that was number 6 Campbell Street, and she has recommended those to us without change. And now what will happen with that is that if assuming we put the rubber stamp on that and say, yep, we agree with that, then all the parties who made submissions will be notified of that. They have the right to appeal, and then if they do appeal, obviously you go through a process to deal with that. If they don't, then the rubber stamp has to be applied, and we finish that process, and that all becomes part of the district plan. So I'm happy to move both.
Thanks, Councillor Foster. I'm happy to second. Anyone wish to speak? Councillor Dawson.
Can I seek leave to ask a question, because we didn't have a pre-meeting for this conversation? I just want to ask for some clarification around Gordon Wilson. Does the zone change either preclude or disincentivise the actual using of that site for housing if the university chose to in the future?
Councillor Dawson, understanding orders that would be required and the right of reply from the mover. Thank you. Councillor Bennett.
Thank you very much. And I'd first of all like to thank officers for their work, particularly on Plan Change 82 in relation to Flagstaff Hill. This has been a long standing issue, and it is now basically protected, so I'm thrilled about that. I'd just like to note that while I'm not going to vote against it, I do have concerns around the redevelopment of One Oriental Terrace. And it's actually not the officers that I'm concerned about, it's our plan change rules. Essentially, I don't think they do give sufficient protection, and you just need to go down Hawker Street at the moment where 2 people have put these boxes in front of a villa, and this apparently is adequate protection. I don't agree with that, and we need to look at our rules. Just in terms of Gordon Wilson, really quickly, this has been actually a bit confusing and messy, and actually it might have just been helpful if we'd had a bit more information. When I read the judge's note, I hit the roof, because essentially it said, we're going to keep the listing, split decision, but it's a controlled activity and you can demolish it. Fortunately, the officers have made my day, and in fact Ms McCarthy too from the Architectural Centre, which basically says that the listing trumps the controlled status which is given in the latest noting. And in fact, an earlier judgment which I've just been sent also, so that's fantastic. I have asked also for advice from the officers about whether I can vote against this, given it's apparently a formality. They have said I can, and I'm going to, with due respect to the university and to the council. I cannot support the control of this precinct being given to the university. I don't agree with it, and so I'm just going to note that I do oppose it. From my understanding, Councillor, essentially if it retains the heritage status, which is a high bar to follow, then I would have thought that you would be able to put housing in there, but Councillor Foster may have a different view on that. And that would personally be my view, that it should be made into housing. I have lived there. It's actually, I know there are some issues, but it's a fantastic structure. The maisonette format, the noise insulation, the sun, it is good. And I have had advice from the engineer that stood against us on this one, that he thinks it could be saved. So I think it is incumbent on people like myself and the Architectural Centre to see if we can come to a solution for this building. And may I just finish by saying that I do believe we should protect modernist buildings. Like the Teachers College, I have walked a little journey. I was more in favour of Victorian and Georgian buildings, but now I'm quite in favour of our modernist history, and I think it should be protected. This is a rare building. The sister building in Auckland is likely for demolition, so in that case I'm going to be very staunch about retaining it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pennant. Councillor Free.
I opposed the delisting of this about a year or 2 ago, and so I'm actually going to join with Councillor Pennant and actually vote against this. I think it is important, if we are staunch about heritage, we have very few of this era of building. I've visited many of those flats. They can be really well modernised. They can be made very energy efficient. They need to be. But we're talking about wanting more accommodation, and I know people liked living there. And I think it actually should be returned to accommodation. It should be restored. It will cost money. Lots of things cost money. I'm actually going to vote against any handing over of this precinct to the university, and I want to see it fixed, if possible.
Thanks, Councillor Free. No other speakers on the list. Councillor Kelly Freeman. Okay.
Your Worship, I beg to disagree. I think the Gordon Wilson flats are more representative of an era than an era, and I just wanted to make that point.
Councillor Foster, right of reply. If you could please address the question.
I'm going to. Most of them are ones that Councillor Pennant raised. So, Iona, thank you very much for your comments about Flagstaff Hill. So that is really good to see. And yeah, look, I do note that sometimes I look at whether it's the rules or it's the administration of the rules. I do have some concerns about some of those issues that you say. But in respect of Gordon Wilson, yeah, you're right. The demolition is a controlled activity. The reason that was put as a controlled activity is to give council the ability, were it being demolished, to be able to say how that was, to manage how that was demolished. Of course, it being listed means that you cannot demolish it without a resource consent to demolish. So you're right in the sense, simplistically, it does trump it. So you cannot get to the demolition without going through the resource consent process to get that. Can you vote against it? Of course you can vote against it. If everybody voted against it, of course, then we'd throw the whole lot out and we'd have to start again from that. So there have been times when a number of councillors have voted against various plan changes when they come to council. We've never had a majority of councillors doing that. That'd be an interesting message if it did happen, and it would be put an interesting cost onto various parties. The university does own the site already, has owned it for some time. They bought it from Housing New Zealand, and Housing New Zealand, I might say, were in the process of upgrading the building and investing in it significantly when bits of it started falling off, and it was apparent that it had what's referred to colloquially as concrete cancer. And that's why people were evacuated from the building, and that's why Housing New Zealand said, we can't do anything with it. Yes, your engineer friend, the engineer, I know who you mean, may well have said it could be saved, but as Brian said to me quietly, at a price. And when we looked at the evidence that was in front of us, the negative value was at least $17 million. In other words, you would spend, let's say you spent $34 million fixing it up, you'd have an asset which was worth 17. Who is going to do that? I don't see anybody likely to do that. That's why the university applied for what it did. That's why why we said what we did in the hearing, and that's why the judge said what he did in the hearing. It's also why I suspect the commissioner stopped short of saying anything else about the viability of the building going forward. In terms of what the zoning change would do, and there's a set of criteria, we were very, very strong on making sure that things like visibility of the escarpment, if there was a new structure, the visibility of the escarpment was protected as much as we could, and there were setbacks from boundaries, etc. So that's part of the design guide for the area. But the university precinct would allow a range of activities. So it does allow for housing, does allow for student accommodation, but it also allows for example, if they wanted to put lecture facilities into this building, if they wanted to, they could do that. If they wanted to put staff offices into this building, they could do that as well. But if you leave it as in a residential, of course, all of those activities other than accommodation become essentially discretionary. So they would need consent for the activities in the building. So it gives them more flexibility with what to do with the building at the moment, but it doesn't give them the power to demolish it. That is another process they need to go through entirely. So I hope that's helpful in terms of understanding what approving the plan change will do.
Thank you very much, Councillor Foster. The recommendation has been moved and seconded. Take two separately, Councillor Penner. Yes, okay, we'll take together 1 and 3. All those in favour, please raise your hands. It's unanimous. And we'll take 2 separately. All those in favour of 2, please raise your hands. So myself, Councillor Gilbert, Deputy Mayor Day, Councillor Kelly Freeman, Councillor Fitzsimons, Councillor Wolfe, Foster, Dawson, Young, Sparrow, Lee, Calvert, and all those against, Councillor Free and Councillor Penner. Thank you very much. I declare the recommendations are carried. Deputy Mayor Day, could I please ask you to introduce Report 2.3 on the delegated authority to amend suburb boundaries?
So I don't think this needs too much of an explanation. It's pretty clear-cut and set out very clearly in the report. But basically it's just making sure that there's a clear process for managing changes to the Wellington City suburb boundaries when needed. And I think it's very clear in that it states exactly when and where and by whom the decisions will be made. So I take it that councillors have read it, and I move this report. And I have a seconder. Councillor Sparrow, thank you.
Yeah, just a very brief comment that 2 points here. Delegation to the chair only applies where fewer than 20 properties are involved. And over the last 45 changes since 2003, no one has objected to the decision. So that's about 3 a year. So it's basically not a contentious issue and very rarely ever raises a concern. Thank you.
Yeah, can I just clarify that if it were fewer than 20 houses but it were contentious, then it would be referred to the committee?
Thank you. Yes, that is the case. If it was contentious, then it would go to the relevant committee for discussion. So, yeah, thank you.
I do sincerely want to thank those councillors who have been a part of Councillor Young, who's been on the Finance Audit and Risk and Management Subcommittee, and Deputy Mayor Day, who's been the alternate to Pacific Advisory Group. Due to time commitments and focusing their specific interests in other areas of concern, Councillor Sarah Free has volunteered to take on these responsibilities. Thank you very much, Sarah, for your courage and wisdom. I'm happy to move. You probably shouldn't second. Councillor Gilbert, wish to second? Anyone wish to speak? Councillor Free, hang on. This could go pear-shaped. Awkward.
Well, I do wish to say that I'm not quite sure I volunteered. I was approached. But as I have come off the Zoo Trust Board after 4 years of service on there, I do have perhaps a tiny spirit of spare time. I also really enjoy the Finance Audit and Risk Committee. It's, I would say to any of you who don't turn up or don't think it's interesting, it's actually incredibly interesting. If you want to understand where our money's been spent, come to Finance Audit and Risk. Where the risks are, come to Finance Audit and Risk. If you want to know what's really happening, come to Finance Audit and Risk. So I will be very happy to do that role. PAG, I of course was the councillor rep there last triennium, and Councillor Gilbert assures me that he is never going to be away, so I will just, okay, sorry, yeah, so, but so hopefully that I'll just be able to swan in when I feel like it and not have too much responsibility.
Thanks
but
very much.
I'm happy to take both of those on.
Thank you, Councillor Free. I do actually sincerely want to thank you. It is correct. You didn't per se volunteer. You were suggested, poked, and then prodded. But it goes without saying that perhaps Councillors Young and Deputy Mayor Day both owe you at least a cheese scone and a hot chocolate, if not a hot lunch. So you can look forward to that perhaps in payment. But well done. You're off to a rollicking good start. Yes, the lead on the Pacific Advisory Group is Councillor Dawson, not Councillor Gilbert. But we'll iron out any issues in the future. We'll move the recommendations. All those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous. All those against? No, it's carried. Thank you, Councillor Free. Now move to report 3.1, reports to the committee. Councillor Panic, could you please introduce report 3.1?
Okay, Councillor Dawson and Councillor Gilbert.
Public Spaces Bylaw Review. Or technically,
it's
a
coming
committee
from
report, it would come through you.
Move.
Councillor Gilbert or Dawson, your second? Second, Councillor Dawson, you wish to speak? Councillor Gilbert?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I mean, a key part of this is the freedom camping policy and the freedom camping at Evans Bay, and the officers have done a great job on this. We've got a fenced, we've approved and hopefully approved today, a fenced area. There'll be trees planted, there'll be improvements to the dump station, there'll be public toilets, there'll be restrictions to fully self-contained vehicles, and the area will be monitored by WCC rangers. Great job, I think, and I think it will be a really great facility.
Thanks, Councillor Gilbert. Councillor Free.
Look, I will support this. I wasn't really minded to support more freedom camping at Evans Bay because I do know that it's impacted on residents a little bit. But I think the proposal's been well thought out and does offer some benefits in terms of some better planting, better screening, a better layout, which will allow a few more sight lines, and a little bit of a restriction on the length of vehicle, which I think will be helpful because it's the very large camper vans which I think do cause residents to feel they're living in the middle of a kind of a different environment from what they used to experience. I want to say yet again that I do want to see some accommodation made with those toilets for disability. I think that's actually the ideal opportunity to put into practice a little bit of what we've heard, provide some really top-class toilets that are there for our people in our city that actually don't have the mobility that we all enjoy. And I still would like, as per our recommendation, for the officers to have a look at the mobility parking in that area and possibly think of one of those car parks as being for a disability car park. Thank you.
Councillor Pennant, right of reply. Oh, Councillor Foster.
Just briefly, I'm pleased with the outcome that we've got for Evans Bay, and I think it's good that we are investing in amenity as well and in management. And I think there's two things we should consider. One is that we need to look after our residents in terms of the amenity that they enjoy. We also need to make sure that the people who are coming and visiting us also have a decent experience too, and that's part of the amenity. And so they have a good place to be as well. Charging will be another issue which I think we ought to be thinking of to try and recover some of those costs. But the 2 points I wanted to make about that is, one is I don't think we've answered the question yet about accommodating the inevitable growth, which we're already seeing growth in camping. We know that the number of members of the Motor Vehicle Caravan Association, is that right? That's growing significantly. We know that there will be more people also, as tourism grows, there are more people who are visiting as well, and we are not providing for them at the moment. So I don't think we've sort of ticked the box and finished this job by any stretch of the imagination. I think we're going to need to do some more thinking about that. I also think that non-self-contained remains a big problem, which we need to address as is a problem all around the country. Probably less so for us than many parts of the country, but it is an issue, and at the moment I don't think there is an answer to that. The last one thing that I did want to mention was that I had somebody in the last week contact me about large camper van in a street and parking in a street. What can we do about that? And the answer is, when you look at our, provided it's mobile and it's capable of moving, it's registered and warranted, and it's not creating a hazard, nothing. Freedom camping doesn't help you, parking rules don't help you either. And so I think that is going to be an issue from time to time. Won't be a big one probably, but from time to time there will be some of our residents in any part of the city who will say, I've got a problem, council, can you do anything? And the answer will be, no, we can't. You might have to go and talk to them and ask them if they want to move, but if they're not going to, that's going to be life for the moment. So there are some issues still around this which we haven't answered, and I think that at some point in time we're going to have a bit more of a think about it. And I particularly think that we do need to look at the provision of more campground space, and at the moment I think we've been a little bit less than courageous around the locations that we could find for doing that. There are some options, probably not easy, but there are some options, and I think we need to do some more thinking.
Thanks, Councillor Foster. Councillor Pennant, right of reply. No wish to speak. Councillors, the recommendation has been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Declare that unanimous. Thank you very much, Councillor Pennant. We'll move to report 3.2, report of the Regulatory Process Committee. It wasn't noted at the start of the meeting, but Councillor Sparrow does wish to sit back for this report, given that he declared a conflict at the Regulatory Process Committee meeting in relation to the disposal of legal road land adjoining 400 Middleton Road, and on that basis I'll ask Councillor David Lee to introduce the recommendations.
Thank you, Your Worship, councillors. This item relates to road closure and disposal of some 1,700 square metres of legal road reserve adjoining 400 Middleton Road. Just as context and background, on the 26th of April 2017, the council actually approved to initiate the road closure process. 3 objections were received. 1 was withdrawn, and on the 16th of May of this year, the Regulatory Processes Committee heard 2 of those objections. It was decided that it would not uphold the objections, and that the decision now comes to the council, so I move the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Seconder, Councillor Kelby-Freeman, wish to speak? Anyone else wish to speak? Councillor Panner.
Thank you. Just briefly, look, I've struggled with this one a little bit, particularly given how little heritage from the settlers from the 19th and 20th century remains in the northern suburbs. But I think essentially I will vote for it, seeing as you'd still need to negotiate access to this quite precious house. And I am sympathetic when my colleagues in the heritage community raise these objections. And certainly for those of you in the Northern Ward, I'm very happy to help where I can to see if we can restore this building. I understand from conversations that there is some desire to do that, and that would be wonderful to see. So thanks for all your work on this.
Councillor Kelby-Freeman.
Your Worship, I'd like to disabuse Councillor Panner of any notion that this land, this stopping proposal will in any way harm the heritage building on the site. In fact, it's much more likely to protect it. The owners of the adjacent properties, including the heritage building, have reported many instances of disagreeable behaviour, antisocial behaviour, and without litigating the whole process that was visited at length over 2 Regulatory Process Committee meetings and a site visit involving most of those who are on that committee, we were satisfied that the stopping of the short portion of land would assist the owners to maintain the building by dint of the fact that they will reduce the antisocial behaviour and the trespassing that happens on the site.
I thank Councillor Kelby-Freeman, and I will stand to talk and support Councillor Kelby-Freeman and Councillor Lee. This was the case. This isn't so much a heritage issue. There was a heritage concern given the nature of the property. The overriding issue, though, was one of antisocial behaviour, actually threat to the privacy and safety of the owners of at the end of the road. This has been going on since I've been a councillor in 2010. It's also been a road where people have consistently, in an ongoing way, been dumping rubbish. Commercial organisations dumping grass clippings and prunings that are taken from all around the city. This has been a significant and ongoing issue of significant concern to the resident, and therefore it's good that we've got this proposal. It's good that we've had the clarity. I want to thank the officers for coming to this amicable resolution, and to the Regulatory Processes Committee for your leadership in getting an adequate response for the resident. Thank you. Councillor Lee, right of reply.
Yes, the actual closure and transfer of this property does not actually compromise the access to I think it's Knott's house. And also the heritage value. So there are still multiple points of entry to the actual heritage site, and this transfer does not actually compromise any future potential. Thank you.
Lee, it's been moved and seconded. Recommendations. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Okay, it's unanimous. Thank you, councillors, and thanks, Councillor Sperry. Can come back to the table. We're now going to move councillors and members of the public into public excluded. I'm going to move that we move into public excluded on the basis of privacy information in relation to Section 7.2a of the Local Government Official Information and Meetings Act 1987, based on grounds under Section 48(1)a. I'll move that. Councillor Gilbert, happy to second. All those in favour, please say aye. It's unanimous. Okay, it's unanimous. Any dissension? No. Okay, we'll move now into public. Agreed that we'll move into public excluded.